on March 7th, so that's another opportunity that we could have questions addressed. Now, as indicated in the packet, we received 4 questions, but the timeline was pretty tight from when they were due on Wednesday evening to when the packet had to go out Thursday. So they weren't in your packet. We have since received those answers, so I'll go ahead and verbally mention them, then we will put them in the packet for the next meeting, so you have them on record. So the first question was, please explain how Traverse City is related to Brown Bridge. Is the property outside the city? Yes, it's outside the city limits. It's a city-owned park. It's in East Bay Township. It is managed by the Conservation District.
Yes.
And they're contracted by the city to manage it. That's why they have projects in the CIP for improvements out there. In the past, it's included, I think, like a pedestrian bridge over the river and some bathrooms and that nature. And yeah, I think that's about it. It's kind of akin to Hickory Hills, which is a city-owned park.
All right. Is there a list of properties outside of the city that the city owns?
I think those are the only 2. but I
No,
can
there
ask.
are a number of other city-owned properties that
really?
aren't public properties. Like, we owned a property on Cass Road until recently,
Yep.
in anticipation for a railroad Y, but then that has since been sold. We do own a property on Keystone Road that is adjoins the Conservation District land. There are a couple other properties that basically are legacy from a tax reversion, or the city had grown Christmas trees, or had its own brush dump, or had some other reason that we owned or acquired land outside the city limits.
All right. Go. I do not have a cloud other than properties.
Just curious. Yeah.
Rob Bachgalupi did compile that list, and it should be somewhere in this building.
Okay. So one thing that's interesting when I provide in the packet for the next meeting the responses is that the DPS director put quite a lengthy response. It goes through the whole history of Brown Bridge quiet area and stuff like that and how it's managed. So it's a lot to take in. It's about 3 pages. Yeah, he really is thorough.
There's a passion there, I think, that people,
I picked up on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
It helps that it's not too far from where he lives.
Yes.
walking distance.
So the next 2 questions related to the DDA. So the first one was Project 1158 Workforce Housing, and is this a CIP item? And it's not a traditional CIP item, but it is it says here, budget identification for participation in housing within the district. And the second question was the Hardy retail space. Is this the former Scallywags venue? How much will DDA office expansion and how much will be for restaurant? So it is the former Scallywags. It's about a 2,000 square foot restaurant that is set up there. And the DDA is looking to carve out an office, since it's adjacent to their office, for the downtown community policing officer. So that would be about approximately 200 square feet. It would have its own separate entrance. So it would reduce the usable commercial space to about 1,800 or 750. Then the last question, the fiber to premise. It was asked whether or not this will complete coverage for all of TC, and according to the Chief Technology and Information Officer at TCLP, that line item is a projected cost to cover the complete coverage for all of Traverse City proper. So with that, I'll hand it back over to the chair. One thing I will note, there were 2 questions there on the DDA component, and we do have the DDA CEO here.
Right. That's a complete list of the questions. That's the entirety of our review today?
Yep, unless there was anything else that they wanted to discuss or identify that come up since.
Commissioners, anything? Commissioner Shaw?
Yeah, just, okay, you can.
Yeah, I was going to say anything this time. I used to have all sorts of questions about the CIP, but I've gotten older and wiser. But I will say I'm really happy about the $200,000 coming from ARPA to go to trees. I think that's terrific. Also that we're not killing a bunch of trees to print out these giant packets that we used to have to lug around. That's wonderful. But I presume all of you saw the emails come in about Eastern Avenue. Was it this week? Last week we had those master plan meetings about Peninsula Drive. And it does appear that the funding is is cut off beyond Bryant Park. We spent a lot of time, I went to both the virtual and one of the in-person meetings, talking about how to get people from Bryant Park down to Eastern Avenue and then into the schools along Eastern Avenue there. Eastern Avenue is a big problem. People are walking along there, cars, they stop sometimes, they roll through that light. I remember, I don't know if it was a planning or a city commission meeting recently, or it was the joint meeting. Commissioner Werner brought up, how are we gonna reroute traffic during the MDOT Grandview Parkway, Front Street redo? Is it going to be coming through Eastern Avenue? Eastern Avenue is big enough to take 4 buses. It's a huge, between Peninsula Drive and Milliken. Can we get some sidewalks there? And you saw there was obviously a concerted effort to bring this to our attention, and I think it deserves it.
I'll chime in because I drive past there every single morning going to school. It's a disaster. When at peak traffic times, right after school, right after, like 5 p.m., right in the morning, it's a madhouse. There's cars everywhere. Anybody who's trying to walk through there at any time of day is walking on the shoulder, walking in people's yards, just trying desperately not to get hit. It's really bad. And the sidewalk coverage ends at Milliken, but people still walk from, the TART trail along the Parkway up Peninsula, up Eastern to where that sidewalk restarts if they're trying to get back to the college, trying to get to that base of the Peninsula neighborhood. So that's definitely that, like a sidewalk there or some sort of, especially once we start putting more traffic through there, a sidewalk or some sort of traffic diversion or just something to be aware that that's a heavy pedestrian footpath, even if maybe, it's not an ideal pedestrian footpath. People use it. People are going to keep using it, especially because that park is there too. So something to be done about that. And there's definitely a risk there. Even in the emails of people being concerned that there was going to be an accident there. I can totally see if someone's, even just walking to school from one of those houses along there, that could totally turn into a really bad situation.
Yeah,
on any given morning.
I can vouch for that. I've done some morning drop-offs there as well, and it's chaos. There's, cars are confused about how to get to a spot to drop off and where to get out and how to get out and the fastest way to get out to get to work. So, yeah, it is a concern. And did anybody notice it's not on the CIP then in walkways? No.
CIP now. I went and spoke with engineering, and they're obviously aware of the situation there too. And so I think it was in December when the engineers was tasked with a couple key segments, missing sidewalk gap, and that was one of them, and cost estimating it. So that from Milliken to Peninsula is about $160,000 right now. They don't have identified funding for it. I went and spoke with the interim deputy treasurer, and he checked all the accounts that fund sidewalks, and they're all empty. Some are even below right now in the negative. He said probably the most likely, he said you can go in the CIP, but again, it's a plan. The most likely thing is to have the city commission allocate funds from the general fund if it's a priority for this upcoming year, because that's the most likely way to get it funded at this time. So note to some of the city commissioners.
Right. It's so close to the schools. It's kind of an oversight from the Safe Routes to School package that we had. It might have been a
And it is
crucial
something
link.
that was highlighted as a gap in our bike and sidewalk network for the mobility action plan.
Yeah, as a high priority.
Yeah.
And I don't know, having talked, because they've been talking about it for time, that it was a oversight, initially, but a bunch of sections had to be pulled out to get within the funding that they had. And that particular section, as one email noted, does have its difficulties, if you will, with grade. So it let's say it costs a lot more per foot than any other basic sidewalk in the neighborhood. But it is definitely something that has
You
been
could not put
recognized.
an ADA sidewalk up Quail Ridge.
That is true.
Okay. All right. Well, something to keep track of and follow through on. Any other? I thought it was because the Boom neighborhood had a meeting or something. All these emails were coming in about the same
Well, I
time.
think that it's because we've been talking about Peninsula Drive so much.
Yes. And it could be that they haven't had their first meeting, but they are getting organized, and it is something to get organized around.
Right.
Yeah, and can provide a little more context on that. Last week, as Commissioner Shaw said, we had our 3 different meetings on the TART improvement and expansion project. The desire is to continue that facility type up to Eastern Ave along Peninsula. Last year, because we did a focus group on Thursday, last year, ending in the fall, MDOT did a road safety audit on that stretch of M37 from Front Street up to where Peninsula and Center split. It identified a bunch of different improvements that need to happen along that corridor. It's not in the 5-year plan, but there is another pot of money that they went after. They got denied funding. So it's probably 2025 till they're eligible for that funding again. But they're hoping that with what we're working on, which is stronger pedestrian connectivity, that'll help strengthen an application for funding. But we don't know what that facility type looks like. One thing MDOT has indicated is likely changing the road from a mat street to a narrow street with curb and gutter. So that's going to manage the stormwater a little better. And that's going to free up more space on each side because you're not going to need ditching or the shoulders. It is pretty tight. There's been a lot of liberties, landscape right away.
Okay.
Something else that's on the horizon.
Great. Well, if that concludes that discussion, no, Mr. Treadwell?
Yeah, just as a follow-up to the downtown office, since Jean is here, will the carve-out of 200 square feet still leave a viable restaurant location? And will that be carved out of the front or the back of?
Or the
Talking about the
side.
Scalawags.
Yes.
Dead center.
It'll be on the side, so you will be able to get into the community policing officer's office off of State Street.
Okay.
So currently, it's 2,000 square feet, so it'll
Yeah.
be 1,800, more or less, maybe 1,750 at the most. But that's a very viable space. So the restaurant equipment will remain, and so it'll be closer to the DDA office.
Okay.
So all of the restaurant equipment is on the
But
western
the back of
half.
house will be unimpacted and it will.
The back of
be
house
able-
is unimpacted.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
basically, you would be using that door, that second door, and they would still retain one door, the restaurant would.
Right. Yeah, we haven't really done all of the work to see, do they still need 2 exits, 2 doors? So that could happen as well.
Got it.
So,
Storefronts are easy.
It's a big space, so there's
Yeah.
plenty.
Thank you.
you're
you.
welcome.
Okay. Well, here we go then. Well, let's move on to our next item is to discuss the goal of expanding housing opportunities. For introduction, Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. So, as was the case last year, this was on the accepted goals of the Planning Commission, is to explore expanding housing opportunities. And again, that's what we're really focusing on as we have these conversations. How do we allow more options for different types of housing within our community? So just to kind of recap some of the things that we talked about, when I started last year, 2 years ago, I started going through all the previous meetings and packets where housing had been discussed. We compiled those in May of 2021. We went through that list. And what I'm about to go over is what was the result of the discussion that the Planning Commission was willing to support or at least explore at this point, not committing hard to any of them, but the ones that they felt were the best fit. So one of them was allowing up to 4 dwelling units in the R2 district. Right now, R2 allows 2 dwelling units. It was caveated when we discussed it about a year and a half ago that there could be no more than 2 residential structures, though, on the lot. Because right now in R2, we allow 2 homes. So it would match the development pattern of what we allow today, but you could just carve those 2 homes up differently. Or depending how it was gets regulated with ADUs, you could perhaps have a triplex and a detached ADU. So no more than 4 and no more than 2 separate structures on the property for housing. The next one was allowing duplexes or triplexes on corner lots in the R1 district, or on lots that are 1.5 times the minimum size, or more simply, allowing duplexes just by right in the district, which whenever you're trying to achieve something, the less restrictions and conditions you have on it, like related to all extra large lot sizes and stuff, the more likely it's going to be implemented. The next one was amending the cluster housing option. So cluster housing allows you, it doesn't give you an increase in density, but it gives you a little more creativity in the siting of the houses on properties. Oftentimes this is used if part of the property is encumbered by like wetlands or some sort of environmental feature. They're also unique because they allow for kind of like a nice little community. If you are familiar with the southeast corner of Jefferson and Madison, there's 5 houses there, and through cluster housing, they have one large shared garage structure and kind of a shared almost courtyard feel between the garage and the houses. Another example that's not technically cluster housing, but it's developed in a pattern that's somewhat similar, is the southwest corner of Wellington and Washington. There's a distinct house there. It's kind of got a sloping roof. It's purple, and it's got a beautiful flower garden up front. But those houses all on the corner there are kind of clustered, and they have shared space and shared garage facilities in the back. So that's kind of to help you envision it. The problem is right now our minimum lot size is 5 acres to use this tool. We do not have a single lot in the city that's 5 acres where this is allowed. So there's a huge disconnect there. By reducing it to 1 acre, you have a greater opportunity of that being utilized, as well as streamlining the process by going through an administrative slump rather than a city commission slump. The next one is permitting 2 principal dwellings on a lot that are twice the minimum lot size without requiring the lots to be divided, and of course with the appropriate setbacks from each other and from the side and rear yards. We have received a couple inquiries of this, and this is happening more with parents aging in place. A lot of cases, the house is a 2-story house, and they'd like to build a separate house in the back, a little bigger than an ADU, but something on 1 floor that the parents can be on the property, they can be close, take care of them. But right now, we don't allow that, and sometimes with our dimensional standards, there isn't a way to split it, so they're just kind of out of luck. Next would be reducing minimum lot width and area with the corresponding small increase in impervious surface in the R1 district. And then, of course, promoting the creation of more accessory dwellings throughout the city, possibly eliminating the annual cap, allowing them on lots with duplexes, and no longer requiring owner occupancy. So that's just recapping what we've discussed in the past and what's currently listed as possibilities in the goals. Of course, as we mentioned when we were discussing the goals, as we go through these conversations, more items might come up and be identified that get discussed. Some of these may be determined not to be a good fit, and they kind of fall to the wayside. So I provided you with an article in your packet called What is Zoning Reform and Why Do We Need It? And that came from the American Planning Association. And I thought it set a pretty good foundation of why changes to zoning are so important to address the housing situation that we have, not just in the city, but of course across the nation. And this is for the benefit of the Planning Commission as well as the public that has the opportunity to pay attention and dive into this. So the first one, and I'll just stop real quick as I kind of capped at the end. These aren't the only options, but these are the 6 that the American Planning Association think are very, pretty easy lifts for communities to implement to start making a difference. So the first one is eliminating single-family only zoning. And I don't like when they say that because the reality is we're not trying to eliminate things, we're trying to increase options. So what they're really getting to is eliminate the exclusive single-family zoning. I'll show a map that was in your packet, but zoning in our city is relatively young. 1943 is not really that long ago. I mean, for some of us it was, but much of our city was developed prior to that without these zoning regulations. Many of our beautiful, more established historic neighborhoods were developed without these regulations. As such, we have a lot of uses in our city currently that we wouldn't allow today. That's what that map was trying to show you. And I'll pop that up, as I said, a little bit later. So the idea of single-family zoning was actually the anomaly when we got our first zoning ordinance in 1943, and then again in 1958, I think we adopted the second one. It was only really the base of the peninsula and the northwest corner of the city that allowed exclusive single-family zoning. Everything else allowed 2 dwelling units per lot or more. So what we're discussing when we say this is actually getting back to the historical development pattern that has created the neighborhoods that we like so much today. Plus, again, as they mentioned, when you have these type of housing options, you're providing people with different price points in these amenity-rich neighborhoods where we have parks, we have close access to commercial activities, close to places of employment, helps increase the ability to walk, bike, take transit, reducing sprawl, commute times, congestion, pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, noise, additional impervious surfaces. and so on. So again, there's a lot of other priorities that have been discussed, both at the Planning Commission and City Commission level, like climate change and things of that nature, walkability, the viability of transit, economic diversity,
Aging in place.
aging in place. A lot of that stuff ties back to land use and how we use our land can better support those other priorities that we have as well. There was a quote in the article that I liked a lot that said, change in the physical layout of the city is what can enable the heart and soul of the city to carry on and not depart. And that heart and soul being the actual people that make up the community. So we talked about that. Next, abolishing parking minimums. The city has really been a leader on this for quite some time. The residential parking requirements were abolished in February of 2021, so we're doing well there. And luckily, the city downtown hasn't required parking since, I believe, the 80s, which is great because what was happening in a lot of communities when mandatory parking minimums were coming up is downtowns were getting hollowed out, buildings were getting torn down just to provide the parking development. So luckily, we dodged that. The next one is promoting missing middle housing, and this is somewhat tied to the first one, but again, more granular. It gets into some of the things that you guys have discussed in your roles, which is things like, goals, reducing minimum lot sizes, allowing different building types, the conversion of large buildings into more than one unit, et cetera. And that is one thing that we do allow, but it does take a special use permit, and that is converting a large building in the R1 into a two-family dwelling. So again, we do have that option, but the special use permit is quite burdensome to go through. So right now, our minimum lot size in the R1B, most of it is 5,000 square feet. 4,000 square feet is something that we had for a while. I think we're at 35 square feet for a minimum width, if I'm remembering offhand. Well, most of the city lots were platted at 25 feet. So again, in addition to a lot of non-conforming uses, we have a lot of lots in our neighborhoods right now that are also non-conforming to their dimensional standards. So we had Jesse this summer put together an informational or interactive map on that, which I'll show as well. The next one is allowing ADUs. Again, another example of how the city's been a leader in this. However, I would recommend there's areas of improvement. We have a cap of 15 per year. And it is true that we have not hit that cap in a while, but it seems interesting. What would happen if we had 17 applications in 1 year? We acknowledge we have a housing issue. We need more housing. Would we really want to turn 2 people down? We acknowledge that this is a type of housing that's appropriate for our neighborhoods. So what at this point is the purpose of the cap? I know there was a lot of concerns when ADUs first came about. Not sure if those concerns have fully materialized.
I think you just kind of answered my question. Like, what was the original intent behind the cap? It was just to try to
was like a
prevent them from popping up everywhere?
It was in a compromise so that they
Okay.
could slowly be worked into the neighborhood and regulate the impact and not be left with something that was suddenly out of
Just like we started out trying it in Traverse Heights before rolling it out to the whole city.
Yep, and then it was 10 per year, and then they bumped it up to 15 because there was a waiting list. But it just seems like an unnecessary regulation right now when we're constantly talking about housing and how much we need it.
What was the year that cap went? Do you know, ish?
To 15?
Well, originally, like the 10. When would that have been?
The start.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
2015, 2016.
Okay.
I feel like I was
Yeah.
back here, but not.
Okay, and then a couple years later, we bumped it up to the 15, and then it's
Yeah,
just stayed.
2018, I think, is when
Yeah.
it went to
Okay.
Yeah.
15.
It's
Sounds
gone
good.
through 3 revisions because there's now standards related to ADUs as far as aesthetics, because some were popping up that look drastically different from the primary house.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that was another revision. Also, we discussed in there, or posed the question, is it necessary to have the owner occupy one of the 2 units? We don't make the owner of a duplex occupy one of the 2 units, but we allow them to rent them both out. One thing I want to go back up to, talking about ADUs, that makes a good point. When we talk about getting rid of the exclusive single-family zoning, we have to realize that we've already done that because of ADUs. Because all throughout the R1, you can have a house and an ADU. So just kind of keep that in mind. Like, we're already experimenting with that, and we're not seeing tremendous negative effects that we're hearing about it.
Well, you can, assuming that your lot size and built area allow for it.
Yeah, there's always, exceptions to exist.
One
based
thing
on
that I
existing.
think gets lost in some of these discussions is when we say you can have, say, 2 residential units on a single lot. we have inconsistent lot sizes, and some lots are either small or built out enough that you physically could not put a second house on there, even if we allowed it.
Yeah, and the way it's listed in the goals is that that lot would have to be twice the minimum lot size for the district. So, and I apologize, I'm gonna bump back up to number 3. We're gonna talk about promoting missing middle housing and the reducing the lot size. One thing that has come out in the draft of master plan chapter on housing is taking that minimum lot size from 5,000 to 4,000 square feet. That would create a bunch of different lots, and you've seen maps in those packets before that could then be split. So there was a lot for sale, I think it was on the corner of Pine and 10th. It's a blue house that sits way far back by the alley, and we got a lot of inquiries because people wanted to split and put a different lot in the front, which we have all along our north-south streets in that neighborhood. But that lot size was 9,000 some square feet, 5,000 square foot minimum, it can't be split. We went to a 4,000 square foot minimum, it exceeds the 8,000, that corner could be occupied by a house. So that's just one anecdotal example of how little tweaks here and there can allow that gentle infill to our established neighborhood. All right, so the next one is zoning for adaptive reuse. This isn't as applicable to Traverse City as it is to the surrounding townships here, where they don't really allow mixed-use zoning unless it's a PUD. We allow residential in every single district, so mixed use does occur. There's a lot of conversations in the communities across the country that are more strict on that mixing of residential and commercial, where they're left with a bunch of empty office space, how to utilize that. We too have a lot of empty office space. However, it's not always as easy as people like to make it sound to convert that office space into residential. There's mortgages on a lot of those properties that rely on commercial lease space, or lease rent rates rather, which are typically much higher than what residential rents are. It doesn't mean that it won't work, and of course, our regulations wouldn't prevent that. So that's a great opportunity for city. Next, we have embracing state preemption. As I mentioned in the article, this does slice both ways. Zoning is enabled to the local level of government for regulation. But sometimes when there's a need, a state will step in and say, hey, you can't ban this. So that happened in California. They preempted local control and said, you can't prevent ADUs. So across the state over the last 6 years, they had 60,000 estimated ADUs built. So that's a successful story of state preemption. But if you remember, about a year and a half ago, we were having those conversations about the short-term rentals. It'd be a horrible type of preemption to take that away because, again, every community is different in this state, and every community would be impacted different from that.
How much are MAP or MML or other entities looking actively at that sort of legislation?
At state preemption,
Yes.
not to my knowledge.
Okay.
It is a sticky subject. Local units of government like their control. That's the way it's been relegated to them. So, again, to kind of summarize, even as you look at this with the APA, notice that they gave you 6. It wasn't just one solution, because not one of these alone is going to make a huge difference. However, collectively, these have the opportunity to help increase housing throughout the city. I did put a link to the study session of the City Commission from February 13th, because again, Yarrow Brown was on there, as was Tony Lenti, and Craig Patterson, providing different perspectives. Tony we talked about it in a community development meeting, then the next day, he made a comment that kind of stuck with a lot of people, and that was, we have to be intentional with our tools. We need to really think about this, not just leave them in the toolbox, but put them to work if we're going to address some of these issues. I also put into the packet for your reference the draft housing chapter that the master plan leadership team reviewed last week on Wednesday. It is in draft form. They provided a lot of feedback, so it's going to look different. But I wanted you, because we keep hearing this comment from individuals that why not wait until the master plan is adopted before doing anything? Well, housing is something that's addressed in our current master plan. It's been on the Planning Commission, City Commission goal for a long time. We acknowledge that there's a crisis with housing and that it needs to be addressed. And we're not bound only to things that are in our master plan, what the city can work on. But I put it in there to show that, it's even in draft form coming out consistent with some of the goals that we're working on. So they're starting to align quite. The March 13th joint study session of the Planning Commission and City Commission, the Master Plan Leadership Team will be facilitating a conversation on housing. Now that we've put the draft together and both bodies are talking about housing, where do you want to go with this? Of course, the Planning Commission, your purview is mostly land use, so we're going to probably be talking a lot about stuff, having a group conversation at that meeting. So with that, I just have two things to show you, the map, the two maps, and then a quick video that David reminded me of that Russ had sent out a couple years ago, I believe it was, about why we need zoning. I also sent you a packet of 8 different publications. Those were provided to the Master Plan Leadership Team after the discussion that we had last Wednesday. And I think what's interesting about them is they're coming from different industries, if you will, different points of view. They're from AARP, Michigan Association of Planning, American Planning Association, National Association of Home Builders, National Association of Realtors. One was even there from the National Association of Oceanic and Atmospheric. NOAA. We'll just
NOAA.
say NOAA. Thank you. Okay. And then the other last one was, can't think of it offhand, but if you read through them all, and it's a lot, they're all coming from different perspectives, but all pointing at similar solutions for housing. The messaging is getting consistent. It's almost as if the wagons are circling around, like what we need to do as communities to really start addressing this issue. So David and I are going to be talking after the meeting about some upcoming meetings, and if you want to go over any of those at a future meeting, just be sure to let us know. We can discuss those. So real quick, just to show you the maps that Jesse, our intern, put together this summer. So here's the first one. It's non-conforming uses. Again, zoning is much younger than much of our development. So these are the uses that we have existing that we wouldn't allow today in our neighborhoods. I want to put a caveat on the data. These are the ones that we have a non-conforming certificate on file for, that they came in and got. They're not required to get that. A lot of people do because it helps with insurance, refinancing, and mortgages if they want to sell. So there could be more out there. The data could be cleaned up a little bit because they're not required to rescind that certificate if they convert, say, a duplex into a single-family home. And our assessor records don't keep track of that, but it's fairly close. So if you kind of pan out and you look, all those green parcels are uses that are in our existing neighborhoods today that we wouldn't allow. These are all just residential and green. And so when you go and you click on one, it'll show you the house and it'll pull it up. You can see that many of these aren't at odds with the character of our neighborhood. They were developed alongside our neighborhood, and they represent the type of development patterns that we do have in our neighborhoods. Some of them are quite beautiful, in fact. Many of these, if you weren't looking for mailboxes per se, you probably would never know that they weren't a single family. So it's a tool that you have at your disposal when you're having conversations with the public about allowing what we once did allow in our neighborhoods. So here we have the non-conforming lots. Over the decades, what we've done is kind of ballooned our dimensional standards, requiring wider widths, so less lot splits are allowed, and also requiring a larger minimum lot size. So when we start handing back out again, it's not really a diversion from our development pattern. Some of these things we're talking about represent the development pattern. So these you can click on and it'll give you a little bit of data, but not a whole lot. So it's 50 feet wide, it meets that, but it's under the 5,000 square foot minimum. So this is stuff that Jesse had pulled in from our GIS database. So again, 401 non-conforming lots. That's not a small number. That's because we've made more properties non-conforming as we constantly increase our dimensional standards and limit the uses that we allow in our residential neighborhoods. And then real quick, this video is less than 2 minutes long, but we'll just turn that for you.
Wait, stop! Rent and home prices are out of control. Instead of just talking about it, what if we could do something to make our city more affordable? How? In a word, zoning. Some zoning laws make sense by keeping industrial areas industrial and residential areas residential. But zoning laws can do harm too. See, when zones allow only single-family homes, in other words, nothing but the most expensive kind of homes, that puts up invisible walls around those neighborhoods. Walls that shut people out. Most big cities wall off half or even 3/4 of their land. That means most of the city is zoned to keep out more affordable choices, like duplexes and apartments. Zoning walls push prices up on the inside and on the outside too, by forcing the rest of us to squeeze into the small amount of land left over. If you can't buy in, you're walled out, pushed away to where prices are lower. That means commutes get longer, creating more sprawl, more traffic, and more pollution. Does that sound like the kind of city we want to live in? Walls that decide who's in and who's out? That's not who we want to be. But we can't start taking them down together with better zoning. Zoning up takes down those invisible walls. It's not the only solution, but it's a big step up to the kind of city we want to be. So what can we do? Vote and talk to your neighbors and leaders about upzoning to take down walls and encourage more homes of all shapes and sizes for all our neighbors. Visit sightline.org to learn more.
Pretty straightforward and simple, but again, reinforces what we've been talking about. So with that, I'll hand it back to discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Commissioners, we're talking today, we're not taking any action. Do you see anything missing? Do you see anything that we're offline on, or Commissioner Shaw?
Yeah, I see two things missing. Everything looks great. I thought the packet was superb for public education. It's really good. But I particularly, again, attending these master plan meetings, what's come up over and over again is, where is the regional conversation about this? We're trying to solve a problem. It's problem A, but there's B, C, D, E, F, all sitting around just contributing to this problem. For example, Yarrow Brown says we need 1,100 rental units in every city, and we need 264 for sale homes. But how is that impacted by what's being built up in Garfield? Does that reduce the amount of rental homes that we need? Who's talking to whom around? We have a huge summer workforce that needs temporary housing. Do they have to be housed in the Mackinac Island that's Traverse City, or can they be housed someplace else? It has a transportation hub. 85% of tourists apparently arrive by car to Traverse City. They're not all going to stay in Traverse City, particularly if we protect our natural resources, prevent that from happening. They'll be in Garfield and East Bay and Leelanau. But again, how do they get to town? I feel like it's just so necessary to have a conversation with the county commissioner, with our local townships, that how can we solve this problem without talking to the people who are contributing to the problem? The other big hole I see is short-term rentals. They certainly came up a lot over this last week as well. There seemed to be county commission support, at least according to that 13th February meeting, to provide some kind of limitations in the places that we don't have them now. I thought it was really interesting at the tourism workshop. There were about 40 of us in this virtual meeting. We were asked, and these were people, there were planning commissioners there were city commissioners there. We were asked, we were polled, how much of our economy depends on tourism? And the poll came out at high 60. Well, in fact, it's only about 20%. So if we've got 20% of our economy depending on tourism, how does that compare to what we're offering in short-term rentals in Traverse City? How much of our housing in Traverse City is short-term for tourists? And balance was a word that came up over and over again. How do we correct that balance? Are we out of balance? Do those numbers exist anywhere? So those are the two places I see that we're missing. zoning for short-term rentals, and then a general conversation, which obviously the planning commission has nothing to do with, but city commission.
Yeah, to answer that question, the last time we had looked at it, which was about a year ago, about 4% of the housing stock, short-term rentals in the city. Yeah, I think there is a will for regional collaboration, because you're not wrong. It's not one community's struggle. It's the whole area. Fortunately, or not unfortunately, I guess it's fortunately, we can control our own land use, our part to address it. But there have been a lot of conversations that we have with our surrounding planners on this issue. It's been part of the master plan where we've gotten together and talked about things like housing, the stickier things that aren't as specific to one community, kind of like how tourism is too. In the afternoon session, that was, or the evening in person, that was discussed a lot. Like, we can address tourism or identify some issues in the chapter, but it's a regional industry. So it's not going to be, the impacts of it aren't going to be solved. So that was one takeaway.
So these conversations with the outside communities, that sounds like a great idea. Is there a format for that? Is there?
It's really, well, there's one format that is hosted by Networks Northwest almost quarterly. Talk about regional issues. They bring in the planners and discuss. In fact, I think we have one coming up later this month. But otherwise, it's a little more organic, getting together. It will be kind of interesting to see on a more regional issue how the county might lead in this effort with the new pilot legislation, because the county, if I understand it correctly, will have to thumbs up or thumbs down this pilot. So we might support it. They have a say in it as well. But housing seems to be something that's important to them as well, their priority. So it's going to be interesting to see where they put their money.
Well, as we go forward with the MPO process, we'll have the meeting at Networks Northwest tomorrow about that. Yes, that is primarily focused on transportation as something that literally moves people from Traverse City to other parts of the greater urban area. But an MPO structure can be a way to bring multiple municipalities that are in a contiguous urban zone, as we have here, together on issues besides just transportation, and housing is certainly something that, yes, Garfield Township does one thing, East Bay Township does another, Traverse City does a third, and they're all part of working towards a regional solution. At least I should hope that they are working together rather than one municipality doing something that then, if they are banning a certain type of development or land use, then it forces that into the adjacent areas.
Yeah, on topics not related to housing specifically, we met last week with Garfield Township at their office, because they're working on their master plan right now too, to talk about where does it make the most sense to focus on corridor connections of commercial activity, transportation. And we have one coming up again on March 16th, specifically about non-motorized connectivity between two jurisdictions.
Yeah, because like in Traverse Heights neighborhood, Garfield and Barlow are both commercial corridors that extend beyond that, but between the two, there are two very disconnected street grids that you can't actually walk or bike without going down a busy commercial corridor.
Well, great. So there are opportunities to set up conversations on housing. Your other question, Commissioner Shaw, was regarding zoning for short-term rentals. Can you elaborate?
Well, don't we have some commercial zones that allow short-term rentals, and maybe they're getting too many short-term rentals because the allowances, there is no cap. Cap is high.
Yeah, there's no cap in the
Yeah.
C1.
Or Ds.
It's
yeah,
C3, C4,
Oh, C3. So
D1, D3 that don't have a cap.
Yeah, C1 and C2, it's 25%.
25%.
Yeah. And, C4 is downtown. It was noted in the Downtown Forward report that DDA commission this last year, the consultant did call out, you have a lot of short-term.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
they might
I
want
wouldn't
to.
go after that one so much as maybe D districts.
And I would say that a discussion of short-term rentals brings into the issue of how blurred the line is between residential uses and lodging uses. That I can understand wanting the master plan to work its way, and therefore it might not be on our goals this year, but for example, right now we have a designated hotel resort district that is largely along Munson Avenue in our zoning maps, but that is not where we're seeing new hotel development or short-term rentals that are operating like hotels. They tend to be closer to our waterfronts and or closer to downtown. So that could be an opportunity that we can recognize, hey, this is where people that are staying here temporarily want to stay. And then the areas along Munson Avenue, we can say that is a good location for multifamily housing. Hey, there's already underutilized hotels that could be pretty easily renovated into an apartment building.
Right. If the owners want to go that route.
Yeah. And zoning is not saying that a property owner has to do any one thing. It's merely providing options and guidance.
Certainly. So you're bringing it up, Commissioner Shaw, was regarding limiting short-term renters,
Yes.
not trying to zone for
Right.
more.
Limiting.
Right. Okay, I misunderstood. Commissioner
That would be
Duterte.
scary.
Well, after the work we've done thus far, I would certainly have an appetite for looking at the 25% limitation seems to work fairly well in C2, and to expand that into D or other districts would be worthwhile looking at, I think, as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, I think the reason we started with that, well, to be frank, we had limited it completely, and the city commission came back with the percentage. So I think we had unanimous support for eliminating them in C1 and C2, and
Yes.
as a use by right, and then it came back suggested from the city commission, and they put forth the limitation. So I think it doesn't hurt for us to take a look at it again at the current rate for C1 and C2. And then I don't understand why I get why we probably didn't look at C3, C4, and the Ds, but it doesn't make sense now to not start evaluating that and looking at it there as well, because there are perfectly prime examples, like Commissioner Colbert mentioned last week or the other week, of the entire block of Gillis and the numerous condo units that are there that are now short-term rentals that could have been housing in the city. And because it's so close to the city, like, that would have been phenomenal housing
Right.
for our stock. I just can't get over how good it would have been, because it's walkable. You can walk to Burritt's in less than 5 minutes. You can walk to downtown TC in 5 minutes. So it would have been really great. So I don't know why we would protect those areas, especially if we want to just encourage growth and encourage community. Like, I'm a fan of intermingling both housing and our commercial districts. Like, it makes sense when we look at the old master plan that we're reworking and how those are supposed to, like, be little communities and little units. It just kind of makes sense to expand those. And again, if we're looking at any and all possibilities for housing, that just seems like a low-hanging option for us to go after. And then totally separate, I know, sorry, but at one point, Tyler Bevier and myself, I couldn't remember his name, sorry, Tyler, and Russ had like a little committee meeting to talk specifically about lot width sizes. I don't know if you have those notes or if I should go find them, but we had like come to some agreements for R1A, R1B, and at the time it was like R29. So I would love to see that come back. It's super easy. We had 2 planning commissioners that did quite a bit of work on that with Russ, so again, I'm the only holdover, but I don't see why we couldn't try to revive that.
Yeah, and I think that is in some of those links to the previous meetings, because there was a lot of maps of where
Yeah.
lot splits could occur and how many lots. And I think
Yeah.
that's where the 5,000 to 4,000 square foot came from.
And there had been, I'm just going to make this statement, which I think is going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. There had been previously negotiated protections and differences between R1A, R1B, and R29. And I think that if we are going through the housing crisis that we are, I don't think that certain neighborhoods or districts should be protected in that way from expanding housing opportunities. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It seems like fake almost, that, like, yes, we want housing, but we don't want it within our district. So, yeah, the city needs housing, but not in R1B, only in R2. So it just seems like not great to me, and I don't want to be a part of that. So I think as long as we can try to maintain like a city-wide approach, I think that provides protections for everybody. Then nobody can say like, well, this happened in my neighborhood, but not their neighborhood. It just gets really like not fair. We're all part of the same city. We're all part of the same county and the same state. Like, what do you expect? So,
Yeah, in other words, like kind of everyone is sharing this together. And yeah, I mean,
Right? Let's work together as a community.
exactly.
And I would say that a lot of the discussion about whether new housing developments or infill conforms with existing neighborhood character is not whether you're putting a duplex into a single-family block, but how it looks. And frankly, our Historic Districts Commission is much better set up to look at design standards rather than just overall building type. And perhaps if there are some areas that the neighborhood feels should deserve a little more historic protection that aren't currently covered by that, then that is a tool that could be used. But it wouldn't take off the option of creating a duplex where there's currently one unit, of adding an ADU. It would just say you can't make it something that looks utterly out of character with the surrounding neighborhood.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that also raises an equity issue, you know? I mean, you said it earlier, where did we first say ADUs could be tested?
Traverse Heights.
Yeah, you know, I had a former elected official say directly to me, oh, no, we can't do that, but we can try that in Traverse Heights when we were talking about housing last year. That's not a fair approach, housing.
Yeah, well, there is something to be said that of the Traverse City neighborhoods, Traverse Heights does have the largest median lot sizes and the smallest median houses. So there is structurally more room for ADUs, but it does bring up questions of equity as far as where are we testing things, and is that a neighborhood that we're testing something really positioned to capitalize on it.
Well, and what are we testing for? We're testing for problems. And if we're saying that some neighborhood is going to accept problems when others don't want to have to deal with any, that there's the equity problem as well. Commission, okay. Chief Tuller, did you?
Yeah, just real quick, and we watched a real short video on walls, and I think that's what we're talking about, kind of, is a type of a wall, right? And which Anna so eloquently explained. Did a very good job, thank you. And also, too, you know, going back to the Gillis Street area, you know, our city was made up of those little neighborhoods, and each had its own little store where you could run and get a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk and get a quick dinner if you didn't go to the big grocery store. I mean, those buildings are still standing in our town, and you can see them if you look for them. And I think that's what we're all trying to get back to, not, you know, stores on every corner, but having that ability, I can walk from here to there. I don't have to hop in my car, at least for today, or maybe the next 2 or 3 days. And I think that's what we're looking at, that kind of density, that kind of mix.
Yeah. Well, and that lends itself to the 15-minute city, which is another,
Yeah, there you go. I was trying to remember that. I couldn't remember that one.
right. The corner deli would be fantastic if every neighborhood had one. I don't know if that store model works anymore, retail.
Unfortunately, it doesn't. Like,
Right.
New York City itself has seen an 80% reduction in corner delis.
Right.
I mean, there's still bodegas there. There are still delis. It just isn't one on every corner like there had been 50 years ago.
Right.
But you'll notice that in the older cities, those commercial corners throughout neighborhoods. Again, before they were zoned out of existence, cases. But you know what helps those survive? Having more people living close to them.
Right.
Get a benefit from the economic viability of those commercial establishments.
Yeah, and when there was something that, might question the existence or the future of that store, they all rallied around it.
Yeah. And it doesn't quite meet what people would have envisioned before, but I'm 3 blocks from the CVS at West Front and Division, and for me, that is functionally a corner store bodega. I can go there and get my gallon of milk, get my box of cereal.
I spend a lot of time in a city in Mexico that's a tourist spot. And when I first moved there in the 80s, nobody was there. There were 20 of us, foreigners living in a city of about 200,000. And there was a little store on every single corner. Well, now there is no zoning in this city. There are historical protections, but everyone has made their house front into a hotel or a posada, a pension. You could put a restaurant in everywhere. The whole place is just full of short-term rentals, and all the little stores are gone. To change the subject, sort of a little bit, Linda Cobert asked this really great question in our breakout in the tourism session yesterday. We were presented with some models for Traverse City, and a couple of them were really way out there, like Yukon, Alaska, and a place in Hawaii. Where is our model? I used to go to Bozeman a lot, and it's a micropolis, kind of like Traverse City. It's just crazy building all over the place. But it is not a model because they have no physical features there. I mean, there's this tiny little river that's all dried up, and so you can just build forever. There must be someplace in New York, that's got the kind of water that we do. Where is our model that we can look at how people are managing their natural resources and the influx of remote workers and a hospital? There's just got to be something.
It's hard to find models that match all of those attributes and are of comparable scale. You can choose communities that match many of them, but they don't have as seasonal a component to their tourism.
I would think New York State's got to have something.
So it was,
Asheville came close, I think, with
Yeah.
the
the
size.
examples, this came up in the the evening session in person. They were just trying to find specific examples of sustainable tourism plans. It is true, a lot of communities have different sustainability and resiliency plans in general, but just on the topic of sustainable tourism. And it's so new in the field of planning, is those examples, those 6 that they shared, those are the only 6 that they could find.
Yeah.
Because in most of them, Sedona was 2017, all the rest were adopted in like 2021, 2022. It's a very new field, a new, I don't want to say field, but area of attention.
Okay, you mentioned New York. It does have a lot of similarities, but of the Finger Lakes region, that is another wine-growing region similar to here, all of the communities are much smaller than Traverse City, aside from Ithaca, which, as somebody that lived in Ithaca, okay, it does have some similarities to Traverse City, but the fact that it has 2 large universities there very much skews it and makes it more of a Traverse City-sized Ann Arbor than...
But again, only 20% of our economy is based on tourism. We think it's the high 60s, but that's not true.
But we don't have, we have NMC, we have
The hospital, we have the school
TCAPS
district.
as a large employer in Traverse City, but it does not dominate our overall cultural landscape the same way that Ithaca College and Cornell University dominate Ithaca's.
The DDA report that came out a few months ago that was mostly focusing on growth, but that used, Burlington, Vermont, and I want to say like Missoula, something like that. But all of those were larger and didn't really have the geographic restrictions that Traverse City had. I mean, Traverse City is a hard city to compare because we have, we obviously have Corbin Lake and then the bays, and we have a river running through downtown, and we have an airport that takes up a large chunk of our city land, and it's a small city too. I mean, most of our land really is townships, and there's no open lots in the city anymore. So it's difficult to compare it, which I think also makes addressing the housing crisis here a lot more difficult, where we have to come up with sort of our own approach because we're not going to be able to really find a perfect model to go off of. We're going to have to work with what we've got, which is these weird non-conforming lots and these lots that abut rivers and wetlands and don't really fit in the model of what we think of when we think of a lot.
If you're looking at geographic restrictions on that impose growth on a tourist-centric destination, you can choose ski towns like Aspen, Colorado, or Sun Valley, Idaho, though arguably because they are narrower valleys that might have township land surrounding them, but it doesn't allow quite the same geographic growth. There's no Kalkaska equivalent in Aspen as a community that might be the next county over, but that people regularly commute in to go to work.
I was just in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, which is one of those small ski towns sort of tucked into a valley, and is very Traverse City-esque. I mean, it's very seasonal tourism. There's a river running through downtown. It abuts a major mountain resort, which you could kind of say is like akin to the Bay in a way. And they almost do sort of have a Kalkaska, if you will, or like abutting outlying areas if you go further out to
closer.
Hayden.
My point is that it's not. The housing stays in the immediate area. Kalkaska is 30 miles away.
Yeah, and
it's still a growing bedroom community.
Oh, the other thing with Steamboat is that they're overrun with short-term rentals and condos and week-long stays basically because it's a ski resort town, and so that isn't something that we want to turn into as much more of a living community because Steamboat, when there isn't a major event or when there isn't snow, is pretty dead. It's a very, very small town when it's not ski season.
Right, and thankfully, we've done a pretty good job of limiting short-term rentals within the fabric of our residential zones. Like most of our city, it's not allowed, except for tourist homes, which, the owner is there when anyone comes anyway. So that's all just fine. And you mentioned all the small lots and the non-conforming uses. I would argue that that's a benefit while we look at our housing and how to allow for more diverse and more opportunities and more variety with our housing. All we have to do is look at our neighbors. My house on 9th Street I had 2 dwelling units on both sides of me. One was a duplex, one was a front and back, 2-structure, 4 different neighbors, and then across the alley was a 4-plex. And, I had no problems with anybody. I had a single mother and raising her daughter, in the alley, and they're still there, and they're great neighbors, and there's no problem with parking. It's just, it's these things that happen that people are sort of concerned about. I just look around, and it's not really there. And as far as parking, people point to parking, and it's like, just take care of your parking. I mean, if you're going to have two units on your property, account for that, and we're not saying that you have to have it, but just as a reasonable landowner, you're going to allow for it. And make sure that that it works. Otherwise, it won't.
I would add for issues that you'll probably hear as you have these conversations, parking, junk, things like that. We have police power ordinances to deal with this. We can address those problems. I think that's an argument that's worthy of eliminating exploring options. We have tools for that.
So what's the education component of all of this as we move along? How do we educate our community? Now, I think people would be surprised to hear that we have 401 units already. I don't know, I was surprised. I think others would be. So how does that work?
So part of what I wanted to say is some of the equity numbers that we saw earlier would be wonderful to have in all of these conversations. Like the maps that we saw earlier, I don't know if I can talk about it, but it's like it breaks down the regional, like the census data shows what the Traverse City region looks like in terms of diversity and equity. And I think that would be really incredible to share every time we have these conversations so that people can loop back to whether or not, they fall in the median income range for the region, just to see if they fall in that group, and then what the housing availability for that group is like in this region. I think it's just really important for educational purposes to bring in the data and the facts so that people can then see it. Because if they're not seeing it, they can tune it out almost. Like they can be like, oh yeah, we're plenty equitable. But then they're actually not seeing that it is.
Yeah, and so what Anna's referring to is some data that we're currently working on, ability action preparation for the open house on the 15th, looking at some of that. No, that's mobility focused, but also kind of ties into housing. It is interesting, like 10% of households in the city of Traverse City proper don't own a vehicle. When you hear like, everyone drives up here, 10%.
And another 44% of households only have one car.
Only
have
one.
one car. And so working on some maps of where these households are and quantifying them like per square mile so we can see where the concentration is. And it's just it all kind of comes together again, because when you have more density, have more viability for economic things that are more walkable for these, it makes public transit more viable, reducing individual car trips, pollution. Yes. You sometimes get to see your neighbor on the street, meet new people, build culture.
And our service industry can have enough employees, and can all of our restaurants can be staffed, and the things that, like, even if somebody doesn't really put their mind so much on equity, they do want to have a city that works. We all live together in the city. We want it to be a good place to be, and that is having more people sharing and working to make it better.
I thought that 2-minute video with the walls was great. We should show it over and over and over again to people. So it describes or explains upzoning. I mean, we use this term upzoning. Nobody knows what that means. That really hit it home.
Chief Teller?
So the map that Sean showed with the non-conforming lots, all those little green irregularly shaped blocks. So would it be fair to look at that as like, along what you were saying, Mr. Chairman, about an advantage or an untapped resource, or, look at the possibilities that we have? And, what we're talking about here tonight, I think is going towards that. So at what point as a planning commission do we chime in, or do we present, hey, look at all this opportunity, rather than here's a map, here's all this information, here you go, here's this opportunity that we have to get to where we want to be. And I'm not talking really so much about like marketing, but like maybe public education, or, I mean, there's a lot of folks that I'm sure that live in this town. I would have lost a bet on how many non-conforming lots we had. I didn't know we had that many. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and I've worked in this town for 33 years, and I didn't know myself. But there are people out there that might say, hey, you know, I mean, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. Yeah, there's all the possibilities.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess the question is, to sum it up, where does the planning commission fit? I mean, are we reactive to that, or can we be a little proactive?
I think we can be proactive. We have a great new tool now, and Aline is our communication specialist. That we have that weekly Bay Brief that we have a tremendous amount of subscribers to, and something like a 75% open rate, which is unheard of. So people are paying attention to that
Yeah,
tool,
yep, true.
and it's helping to get the word out about it. So there may be an option there to do just that, and then get creative. We're going to be going back out and start doing our spring engagement for the 2 planning projects. A lot of this stuff probably won't be ready for prime time yet, but we also found it was pretty effective by just going and doing some of those pop-ups, going to different places in the city and talking with people.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we could get in, you know, I really like this group. We all do our due diligence in our own way, shape, and form, but I would really like to get into the position of saying yes to a lot of things rather than no to a lot of things. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it'll be kind of telling too, when we meet on the 13th with the city commission, to have that discussion. Where are they going to support you in this effort? That'll help, you know, where should you spend your time?
That, and there's plans to get to the neighborhoods, right? To
Yeah, so around the beginning of April, we'll
master
be
plan?
setting up, I think we got like 18 different locations. Well, we haven't had the exact venues and locations set, but some neighborhoods are really small, some are informal, you know, so we're kind of putting a few together. But yeah, that's the plan, is to go out, and we'll have a virtual component to that too. We're not gonna be able to get to each community once with 18 of them, but then having people provide information.
Right.
And there's other chances. I was going to the Central Neighborhood Association to participate in a panel. I think that's really helpful as planning commissioners. Goals these are to those conversations, hearing from them.
I think if we can collect stories or testimonials, like what you were talking about with all your neighbors, your various neighbors, it's a great story. You know, these are the people who live around me. They're great neighbors. Hasn't affected me. Noise problems, no garbage problems, or whatever about. And then your map for people who are worried about, well, what's a quadplex going to look like? You've got pictures of what they look like, and I just don't think people realize. And the more things that we can collect about this is what it's like to live in a neighborhood like that.
Well, and that we're not proposing big multifamily
No.
dwellings, you know,
Huge high rises.
towering over, you know, neighborhoods or anything. This is gentle infill, but it allows for so much more opportunity for people to find a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. You know, where is that? You know, within our neighborhoods, it should be available. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we'll open up now to public comment. If anyone here would like to speak, please do state your name, your address, and whether you're a Traverse City resident, you'll have 5 minutes.
Hi, Ty Schmidt, 841 Washington, and thank you for having this conversation and having it on the agenda. Fully in support, like the chief says, saying yes to things. And I think this town is becoming more and more ready to say yes to things. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to encourage this body to put this up to a vote on those 6 bullets as quickly as possible, to put it in the court of our city commission, who has said that this is their #1 priority, and put their money where their mouth is. Housing delayed is housing denied, and our workers and our seniors and our families can no longer wait. So I'm all for telling stories, but I think we're past stories. And the packet's phenomenal, all these meetings we've had over the years. So I think wonderful talking. Let's put it to a vote. I don't know how many we need, five yeses here. Take it up, kick it up. We just need 4 at the city commission, and then we can get on to the next thing. So that's my recommendation. Can I talk about Eastern too, David? Or is this just housing?
No, go ahead. It's open.
well, I was on the Safe Routes to School team when that was happening, and so was Debbie with Russ and Missy. And I'm pretty sure that segment was on the plan, and like Sean says, like the money just ran out really quickly and it got removed. I'm a little disappointed that didn't get just removed from that plan and put back in the CIP. So maybe, again, I know you're busy, but maybe going back and looking at those maps of the things that the community, right? We went through all of these community engagements with families and surveys and yada, 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 but in there were things that impact kids getting themselves to school. And if all we're talking about is 160 grand, I'm not sure the mechanism of how that happens, but surely we can do that. Surely, if we're talking about spending millions of dollars to widen a path along the bay for our tourists, surely we can take care of our people in the neighborhood. So thanks again for your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hannon, Goodwill Community Engagement Officer, 2279 South Airport Road. My office is Common Grounds, 414 East 8th Street. I spend a lot of time in town, in the city, and with people experiencing homelessness, and I'm really encouraged by all this talk about housing. I'm really glad that you all are here and talking about it, and like Ty said, I really hope we get to move forward with some of this. I think the stories are valuable when it goes to the city and we have some naysayers. I think those stories could be powerful if people could come and say those at the city commission. I remember a long time ago when ADUs were talked about and capped, and I remember a lot of the naysayers were because they were saying that they didn't want transient type people in their neighborhoods. And we see that that's not what has happened. So I'm really glad for this. Keep up the good work. We need housing, like Ty said, fast. We have 10 to 30 people experiencing homelessness die every year in Traverse City, and the more housing we can reduce that number and hopefully to zero and get everybody off the streets quickly. And like the beautiful Break Down the Walls video said, housing for everyone in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Hannon.
Hi, Tim Warner, 608 West 7th Street, a city resident. And I actually had to take notes. It's a great meeting. Thanks for having it. I thought that I would just speak, but then there were so many things I started to jot them down. So originally I was planning to attend because of housing and to encourage you and support that. And then when I was reading the packet and saw it was the CIP, I was like, wow, that's great too, because the Eastern Milliken, and I'm guessing because I'd been in communication with George Thompson and others from that neighborhood throughout last year, the points that were made, I had encouraged them to keep track of the calendar, and when it got to be CIP budget season, that was the time to speak up. So I'm guessing they were watching the calendar and saw the packet as well. So starting with the housing, I too would encourage you, those 6 bullets that are there, I think they're ready to go. Like, yes, you could talk about them more and you could refine them and whatnot. I think they're ready to go. Take a vote, send it on to the city commission. Because as you were discussing, there's so many other things you can be talking about, stories. There's so many other housing initiatives that you can be working on. So there'll be plenty to talk about, but if you can move those along, fantastic. So I'd encourage you to be bold. To the point about talking to our neighbors, I had a meeting with Marty earlier today about other topics, but somehow he slipped in that he was talking to leaders from neighboring townships and the county just yesterday. They had a meeting about housing, or housing was a topic. Maybe that wasn't the only topic. And then to the regional versus doing our own thing in the city, I thought Tony Lente touched on that really well when he spoke to the city commission, kind of splitting it out, what I was hearing, and others may have heard it a different way, and I haven't followed up to confirm, but what I heard, maybe it's because this is what I wanted to hear, but is that a regional approach is great when we need a political voice to be heard downstate. Like, that's essential, what he was saying. But as far as taking action, like what you're proposing, do it. Like, jump in, be deliberate. That wasn't the word he used. It doesn't matter what word he used, but like, do it. Local municipalities, do your thing to provide more housing. Everybody's got to do their part, but regionally speak up when we're trying to have a voice down. Cut me off on the 5 minutes, but I'm going to go on to the Eastern Milliken, because I too think it's a great thing. It was in the Safe Routes to School, especially with MDOT detour that's going to use Eastern and Milliken. Yeah, 160,000 sounds like a lot of money to us as individuals, but to a city, it's not a lot. And I would encourage you to put it in the CIP. Think of the budget as a separate thing. You know, it's up to the city commission to figure out how to spend things and to approve the CIP or not. But we were just talking the other night about having a budget surplus of $1.6 million that we had to figure out what to do with. So there we go. Yes, we'll have to be thoughtful about how to use the money, but there is money out there if there are important things to be addressed. Also in the CIP, because I was then very interested and went through it, cut me off, whatever. I would encourage you with the new Boardman Lake Trail, you were talking about equity, to put a connector at the west end of Carver to Boardman Lake Trail. That's not in the CIP, and it needs to be there. Like that's equity. We have this beautiful new loop around the lake. How do the people that live over on that side get to it? Yeah, they can go all the way to the library, get on the trail, or go all the way down. Like there's this traffic light there, walk signs, et cetera. That's where it makes sense. So Carver, and then again, because so many people are using the trail and more will, Franklin, I know it's in the CIP for like not this year, but the next year, move it closer. It's not a big expense. It's a matter of moving fence. We don't have to have the beautiful final promenade. Let's just make it accessible, because that congestion point by the boathouse, it's going to get really bad in the summer. And that would open it up. And we can figure out how to make it beautiful and where to put benches and do all that sort of thing. It can be a phased approach. And then finally, if we're making the Boardman Lake Trail more accessible, 10th and Lake, go take a close look at it, because that's private property. And if you come up the trail and you're on a bicycle, it puts you on a sidewalk. Like there's no natural way. So again, it's not a big dollar thing, but it requires dealing with private property owners, and it takes some creativity and initiative how to make that a better access point for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Warner.
Hi, my name is Beth Fulmer. I'm at 1123 Randolph Street. I'm a resident in Traverse City, and I was just really encouraged to see all of the items on for discussion tonight. And I too encourage you to move quickly on these. I'm an architect by background, currently not doing that here in Traverse City, but we're looking for a home. So I, have a personal interest in seeing more diverse housing options available to people. So thank you for tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Homer. Seeing, we're going to close public comment. It seems like everybody has commented. That's like a record.
4 for 4.
Yes, 4 for 4. Excellent. So thank you for that. Commissioners, any other final thoughts? Close of the meeting.
Can we have these items that Commissioner Werner suggested added to the CIP?
Yeah.
How do we
Is
do
it-
Carver
is
to
it
the
possible
Boardman
to add
Loop,
something?
The 10th and Lake to the Boardman Loop, move
Eastern.
Franklin to up a year and add Eastern.
Can we do that? We need a vote for that.
I don't think you need a vote. The problem is, I don't think,
Timing?
yeah, we don't have our engineer in, and we got to put cost estimate. I able to do that.
Well, we could plug them in and get the
We
cost.
can be recommended for
Yeah,
addition.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I
Right.
didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, it's not approved. It's not yet approved.
Right.
So
Yes,
Yeah.
it
get 'em
is
on
a
that.
recommended addition. And if the
yes,
timeline doesn't allow it to be added, then before the CIP is officially adopted, then it can be an amendment to the CIP.
yes, there's general support from the commission to add those items. All right.
What, I guess a question for you, Sean, what does the timeline look like for getting those 6 bullets in amendment form and getting them up here before us for a vote?
Current planning engagement, I would probably take a month to get all the legal language and have Lauren look at it, cross-reference every chapter, because there's references to. Then from there, planning commission would have to review it. They'd have to set a public hearing, which would be city commission, need to get it in a packet at least 10 days before they can see it. Then they have to introduce it and wait at least 14 days for any possible action. 3 months, 4 months. And that's if we can get it all put together. You know, like, I will not have seen my daughter once this night because I've been at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So that's the workload that I'm operating at right now. So we're running really thin without another planner and staff.
Well, if we could, let's put it on the front burner and
Could
Chief
we,
Tell.
let me ask a procedural question. Could we maybe provide a small, like, education packet to the city commission that says, hey, these just came in front of us, we're studying them, we're going to study them further, vet them out, and then we'll formally present them in the near future, but just for your consideration, this is what we're looking at. I mean, is that possible?
Yeah,
Or would
especially
that
if
be
it,
a benefit? I mean, I guess
think
I should
that's-
ask.
if it came before as at a study session, then that would be a further opportunity for both the city commission as the body that will finally pass it to weigh in, and also for more public that might follow city commission meetings, but not planning commission meetings.
I don't want to send
Yeah.
something up that's not, like,
We have a
done.
joint meeting.
Well, that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah, the 13th, just
Do it
so we're
then.
2 weeks away. You have the chance to have that conversation.
And this came up at our, at, I think, our first joint planning commission and city commission meeting about informing the city commission of what we're working on. And so when it
that's
gets
kinda
there,
where
it's
I
not
was
this
going with
huge,
it.
long, oh my gosh, where are we kind of stuff.
Yeah, just give them a heads up. Hey, this is coming down the
Exactly.
pipe.
Right. All right. All right, so we'll look forward to that joint meeting. We'll please add these housing opportunities to the agenda for that. Right. Well, great. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
Great meeting. Thank you, Sean, for all those articles. They are great.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
take your time looking through them.
Ben.
So you got a chance. Yep.
Good.